Hi, I'm Chris Hill, and today's video I'm going to talk about the youth archer, from just discovering the sport as a recreational, just fun activity, all the way up to them deciding that they want to be a competitive archer and they want to start entering maybe competitions or tournaments in youth divisions, to even maybe going to the JOAD Outdoor Nationals or shooting the Vegas shoot as a goal that they want to do. A lot of kids discover the sport at an early age. Sometimes it's because the parents shoot or their friends shoot, regardless of how they get involved. Drew got involved in archery because when he was born and up to about 2 years old, my wife and I both worked, so we had to share him back and forth for their scheduling. And some of the nights during the week, I had the JOAD to go and work with the kids. So I would take Drew with me, and he was 9 months old, and I would sit him in a playpen in the corner, and then I would run the JOAD and teach the kids that were in the JOAD. And the parents sometimes would come and pick him up, but for the most part, as far as back as he can remember, when he's pulling himself up to stand, he was watching kids shoot archery. So from 9 months, a year, up to 2 years, 2.5 years, he wanted to do that. It was like, me do it, me do it. So he wanted to shoot archery. I don't think he really understood what it was or if it was fun or not. He just saw other kids doing it, and if they were doing it, it was something he had to do. So my first challenge was to figure out a bow or something that he could deal with. So our shop had this really small, tiny, almost toy compound, maybe 3-4 pounds tops, and so he would shoot that as you see in the video here. I usually had to hold the bow for him, but he could pull it back and he shoot. And he could understand the concept of, you put the arrow on the string and you pulled it back and you let go, and the arrow went and hit the target or the bail. And he just wanted to do it over and over and over. And he couldn't even speak. His vocabulary was maybe 2 or 3 words, but he understood what he wanted to do. And then from that moment onwards till about age 4, my goal was to try to find a bow that he could handle on his own, and be able to deal with the load and the actual weight of it. So the bow that we found is called a Bear First Shot. And this is a little fiberglass bow, probably 36 inches, super tiny poundage. I mean, it's almost nothing. It comes in a kit with a couple of arrows and a little vinyl quiver. The vinyl quiver is basically a toy, and we threw that away right away. And the 2 arrows that came with it were kind of safety arrows that wouldn't stick in anything, even a yard away. So we got rid of that, and I got him a set of just aluminum arrows, way too stiff, way too long. But he could, at about age 4, he could hold it himself, draw, anchor, and shoot. And we started out with the target about 3 or 4 yards, and slowly increased it to 5 yards, and then 6 yards. And then he kind of discovered that there was the JOAD pin shoots that you could do to earn pins. So then he had to have the pins. So that was a big motivator at that time. And we worked the target back to 10 yards, and then he started to shoot for the pins. But at that time, the real focus was just flinging arrows, having fun. If he happened to get a pin, great. If he didn't, great. I was really just trying to instill a joy and a passion for the sport. And I didn't look past it any further than that, even though I competed, and my passion for archery was just through the roof. I didn't want to force that on him. I wanted him to just have a good time and just shoot with it. So at about age 4, he could handle this, and he started shooting. And I would put up things to shoot, not necessarily just targets, but just decks of cards, playing cards, balloons, anything to shoot that he would just have a good time with. And I just slowly worked the distance back as he grew into the bow. And by the time he was about 6, he had outgrown this bow. But he had shot and gotten all of the 10-yard JOAD pins, which is about all that this bow is going to be accurate at. Now, this comes in a couple of different sizes. This happens to be the smallest one. It's left-handed or right-handed. It's a decent bow for what it will do. It will actually throw an arrow 20 yards to the target, but it's not going to be accurate at all. It's barely accurate at 10 yards. And it was a miracle that he got the first 4 or 5 pins at that distance. But this is really great if you have a little one, age 4, 5, or 6, and you want to get them started in archery. I don't, any of these companies and that I show you the bows, I don't have anything to do with. This is just me as a dad and as an archery coach, trying to make it possible for the kid to shoot at the age that he wanted to. So this was the first bow. So after this, he had used up all of the pins at the 10 yards, and he needed something that would get to 20 yards. So we went to a wooden bow. And that's this style. This is, you probably see this at every Joad shop that you go into. They have a bunch of these. This one's a 48 inch. Actually, this is a 54 inch, but they start at 48 inch and they go at 54 inch and then about 60 inch. So I got this one. It's the 54 inch. It was a little bit big at first when he was 6 and 7, but I knew he was going to grow into it, and he was going to grow into it very, very fast. The wooden bows, the pluses are that there's a little hole for the plunger. There's a hole for a little front rod, even though the first year that he shot this, there was no stabilizer at all. I wanted to keep the weight as light as possible because the bow was still heavy for him. It had a little rest on it. Now these limbs, they kind of just screw into the riser itself, and there isn't really any adjustment at all. They're just what they're going to be. If they're out of alignment, they're out of alignment, and there isn't much you can do about it. The way that I dealt with this was, as he got better and he needed the bow to be more in alignment, I took the limb, the top limb, and I would grind the bottom of the limb and the sides of the limb so that it gave me wiggle room to move the limb side to side. The bottom limb I left solid. And then what I could do is I could arrange for the bow to be fairly lined up. And this was accurate, and I would crank it down. This worked really well at 14 pound, 16 pound. Once you got to about 18 pounds, the kid would start shooting, and after 3 or 4 shots, the limb would drift one side or the other. And you couldn't really tighten it down. So that's when I knew we had got to the max of what this bow would do for him. But over the course of from 5 years old to 7 years old, we were able to transition into nothing on the bow for the first year from 5 to 6. There was no sight, no stabilizers, anything. He shot bare bow with it. I just wanted him to get used to the weight of the actual bow. Scores weren't important. He didn't really try to get any pins. Everything was still like just popping balloons, having fun. And then slowly I would put a sight on at about age 6, let him get a little bit more accurate. We put a little short rod that was out in front. I gave him about 6-8 months to deal with that, because of course he's seeing the other archers shoot, and he sees they have full stabilizers and all this stuff and fancy sights, and he wanted all the accessories. He used to tell me all the time, when can I get more stuff to stick on the bow? And it was so hard for him because I kept saying, just in time, you got to grow and you got to get bigger and you got to get stronger. Eventually we had the sight on this bow, and he had a long rod. And then he wanted to add the extension and the V-bars, and we did that, and that affected his form. And you can see that in the videos and the picture that I'm going to show you, where it raised his shoulder and twisted his arm. And then I had to spend the day undoing that and teaching him back how to push the bow. So eventually we finished up saying with just a long rod on this and the sight mount. Also, once we got into the 18-20 pound range, the sight would vibrate out of the holes here, and I had to keep putting in these little brass inserts and re-gluing them. So that's when I knew that this bow had reached the end of its life for being effective for him at his poundage and what he needed for accuracy. But it's a great bow. It was a great bow from age 5 to about 7, and it was one that he could definitely heft and deal with. And it worked its way all the way out from bare bow to with a sight to short rod and then long rod. It just wasn't quite working out with the extension and V-bars, but it would probably do it if the kid was larger and could handle the actual pure weight of the bow. Now, one of the issues you'll run into with the youth bows, especially 48 inch to 54 inch, is that the strings that are made available just as a standard stock item aren't very consistent and can sometimes be too short. A string should be 3.5 inches shorter than its length. So a 54 inch bow should have a string that's 50.5 inches. So here are 4 different strings, 2 cartel and 2 Dacron. These were ordered online. You can see I've taped them down here and kind of lined them up, and these for the most part have almost very few to no twists in them. And as I come down to the end where we get to 50.5 inches, you'll see that only one gets there. The others are short. This one is nearly an inch short. These are a ½ inch short. And this ½ inch to inch short really will not let the string lay on the limbs at all, and it'll just stress the limb tips, and basically the string will just be holding by the tips, which is okay for flinging recreational arrows if the kids just want to fling, but this is not okay if your kid wants to compete in tournaments and shoot and have some consistent groupings. So out of these 5 strings, actually only one of these works okay, and 2 barely function and are there just in case of emergencies. So now I'll show you the one that is okay actually on the bow. Now lastly, the other thing that will happen is you'll have 2 bows from different manufacturers. Both of these are common. This is a cartel with Samick limbs. The other one is a Great Tree Mohegan limbs. But you'll see that as you get near and come up to the limb tips, where the string groove is to hold the string is different. So the Mohegan bow, it's okay if the string is shorter because it doesn't have to go as far out to each limb tip. But the cartel and some of the other ones, the string groove is much closer to the end. So if your string is a 50 inch, it's not going to work at all. It could be too short. So this is an issue that you also have. So you got to kind of look at where are the limb, where's the string got to go to the end. But your best bet is to always make sure that your string is at least 3.5 inches shorter than what the bow is. Anything that's shorter than that, it's just not going to work. Okay, so here we have the bow strung with the string that was the 50.5, and you can see that basically about 1.5 inches of the string is in the string groove, and the rest of the groove is not. This is about as good as it's going to get for this bow with this string. Truly, it needs a little bit longer string, but 50.5 is what we can get. The other strings will be way too short, and you will have hardly any of the string groove showing on the limbs. Let's put this here, see if we can. But this will function because we've got about this much away from the limb tip. The shorter the string is, the more it's going to bring the string leaving the limb tip about here or higher, and that's what we don't want to do. That's going to stress the limbs and the limb tip much more and not going to be quite as consistent. So at the end of this bow's life, with the stabilizers, the sight, everything, Drew decided and came up one day and just said, I want to shoot the Vegas shoot. So that meant that we had to have a little bit better bow and a little bit more out of the bow if he was going to try to shoot Vegas shoot and wanted to be competitive and to have a great time, but also be consistent. So we started working on the training then, having him shoot more, mostly to build up his stamina, not so much the scores itself or his ability or skill at shooting. At the time, I think he was shooting on a 60 centimeter target, maybe 150 points to 220. His personal best was a 221, right at when he was going to shoot Vegas. And when he went to shoot Vegas, I told him that he just had to have fun. I wasn't concerned about the score that he shot, but all we really wanted him to do was shoot his average. So for the 6 months before Vegas, we had kept all his scores that he had done as he was progressing forward, and we figured out what the average was, and that was a 150. And there was a MK XR stabilizer that he wanted. He wanted the long rod, and I said, well, if you go to Vegas and you shoot your average, your 150, then I'll buy you the stab. Otherwise, we still got work to do. The first day shot, he shot like a 146 or 148. He was just a couple points off of it. and the second day he shot his 150. So he was fairly accurate both days as far as being consistent on his score, and I was super proud, and I bought him the stabilizer. And that showed me, though, that this bow had to be upgraded to go any further just because it had reached the limit. So the next bow that I got him was the WNS. It's a 21-inch riser. It's about as small as you're going to get for a youth riser. It's a little weighty. These are WNS short limbs. I went with this because I really like that there's actually a limb alignment system on it, so the bow can actually be aligned. Again, there's all the bushings for the front rod, for a clicker, for a sight, so this can grow with him for several years. The problem was being at 9 and 10, he just wasn't big enough to manhandle it. It was too heavy just in weight, and his form suffered. We had to take everything off of it as we worked up. We were just doing the bare bow, and it really just with nothing but the riser and the limbs, he was struggling to shoot, keep good form, and was struggling to shoot any number of arrows. So while this is a great bow, and then by the time he's about 12 or 13, this will be his bow, and it's set up ready to go. It came out a little bit too early, so I realized that I couldn't go quite to a 21-inch yet. I got to wait for him to catch up to it. So then we went to a plastic cartel riser. This cartel riser, I went with Samick limbs just because I was wanting to get in the 20 to 24 pound range to give him a little bit more poundage. Right now, at full draw, he's only pulling about 14, 15 pounds, so it's not very much. Again, this puts us back into the problem where you can't align the limbs. There's no limb alignment system. So whatever you get when you put the limbs on the bow is what you get. And this bow is way out of alignment. The string is completely over to the left, and it shoots arrows into the riser. Now, there's going to be a supplement video that I'm going to have next after this one that is going to show what I did to compensate for this bow not being in alignment and not being able to be in alignment and still have it turn into a really good shooter. This bow is lightweight enough that he can handle it with a long front rod, with the sight extended out. It shoots really consistently in really good groups at 20 yards. Right now he's shooting in the mid to high 230s with this, and this is probably going to be his bow for the next year to year and a half, 2 years. And I'll just go up again with limbs, and as he gets bigger, and go up in the poundage as he needs it. But this is the bow that we're at in the end. Now, the first arrows that he shot with the green bow and the wooden bow are just aluminum arrows with feathers. And then once he decided he wanted to compete at Vegas, I got him some carbon arrows, the Medallion XR. Really like these. A little bit pricey, but these were light. They'll go the distance even out to 30 meters if he wants to shoot outdoor nationals at some point. And they fly really well, and they're really consistent. But I had feathers at the time, so the first year or two that he shot these, and when he shot Vegas, he shot with feathers. I think the feathers are very much more forgiving. They can shred them and tear them up, because just about every arrow that these kids shoot out of these bows, they're going to be stiff, even if it's a 2000 spine or something. I mean, it's just going to be stiff. They're going to have contact issues. They're going to be shooting into the riser. They're going to hit the rest, hit the shelf. So you just have to make do with what's best and that you've got and what's going to work out. Now he's shooting with the spin wings, only because the fletchings got all ruined, and from all my competitive shooting days, I have a bucket or a big bin full of spin wings, and so it was just a easy transition just to put those on because they didn't cost me anything extra. A lot of this stuff I bought used. I have my philosophy that buy once, buy a good quality, and it'll last. This was actually a Shibuya sight I bought used. It didn't cost me that much. I put it on his first bows, just pulled it all the way back. It was a little weighty for him, but in the beginning stages when it was on the brown bow, once he got used to just shooting this and wanted to go to a sight, having the more weight of the heavier sight got him ready to start using other things like a very short rod or a long rod. So there was a future goal and plan. The plunger as well, it's a biter plunger, but I bought it used. I got it at half the price that they go for. It's one plunger. He's used it with the brown bow. He'll use it with this black bow. He'll use it with the red bow. At least this sight will be used on the next bow and the next. To continue with this, for Christmas, the first year he shot, I bought him an Easton quiver. It was expensive. I think at the time it was $85. He was 4 years old. He's now almost 11. So 7 years later, this $85 quiver that was kind of crazy to buy for a 4-year-old still works perfectly. It's still in perfect condition, and he uses it. This quiver will take him up into his teens, his 20s, until he just decides he wants to buy something else. So this was money well spent, because this was less than what, $10 a year. I mean, this is just a no-brainer to me. I didn't have to buy a quiver and have it be crappier and cheaper and fall apart, and then buy another one, and then buy another one. And now, some of the other issues that you come into with a very small youth archer is getting equipment that's the right size or fits. The first thing is like arm guards. You definitely want the really long one that'll cover most of the arm, because any string slap or hit is going to be very discouraging and painful, and you don't want to dampen the spirit that they have for the sport as they're liking it. Chest protectors are a little bit harder. When Drew first started, he was wearing one of my old ones. It was a small, and it would literally go around him twice to snap. And I post a picture here so you can see that the chest protector is literally like twice his body. There are companies now that make chest protectors that are really small. Fivus is one. This fits him, works really great, is a quality chest protector. Same with the finger tabs. Fivus makes an extra small finger tab, has a metal plate, finger spacer, fits really tiny hands. These are perfect for him. And has been since about age 4. Now he's almost to the point where he's starting to wear this out because the leather isn't quite enough, and I'll move him up to maybe a small AAE or a small Fivus. But these are just like worth gold because it's correct, it fits their hand, it gets them in the proper hand position, and it's not too large where it's like this big bulky thing in their hand. But you really want this once your kid starts to compete. Up until then, you can use any of the finger tabs, the felt ones, the flat ones, but you really want, once you start getting into wanting to be super consistent, you want one that has a really good finger spacer and fits their hand really well. For arm guards, Drew started out with a really long one, went from wrist almost to shoulder. Then he transitioned to one that was a little bit longer. It just covered from basically elbow to wrist. And then now he shoots just a regular cartel arm guard. You always want to make sure that you get one that's going to protect them from any slap, because a lot of times they have a tendency to want to twist the arm and have some not so stellar form in the beginning, and you want to make sure that you're not beating the arm up, because that can be demoralizing to them. And then lastly, for the first part, when they're just recreational, they just want to fling arrows and have a good time, and maybe there's a little bit of score for a pin, that's all great. But once they come to you and they say, you know, I want to do this tournament, I want to go in, I want to compete, that steps up the level of commitment, it steps up the level of training, and it steps up the level of seriousness a little bit. But you always want to still maintain a real positive outlook to their archery. So when Drew is shooting, he has a great group and he has 3 outliers. I'm like, great job, great group, this is awesome. If he makes a bad shot, I still say good shot. I say good shot, good shot. And then the first thing that I say is something that he did right. So he'll make a shot, maybe flings his hand out. and I'll go, good shot, dude, you stood up straight, front arm pushed, it's really good. And then if he says, well, the arrow went way over here, then I'll offer an explanation. And it's cause to consequence. Well, it went over there because you threw your hand out, and that pulled the back of the arrow this way, so the arrow's going to shoot this way. And I give him an explanation for what he's doing wrong. But it's not like, no, you did that, don't throw your hand, no, you didn't. You don't want a lot of negativity on it, because then it's hard enough for them just to train, to be competitive, and to be a little bit serious. I mean, I'm not talking about USATs or trying to be on a USA team. I'm talking they want to go to the Vegas shoot, and they're just going to shoot in the kid division, and they want to have fun, and they don't want to be too terrible and be spraying arrows everywhere, and they want to be able to show that they got some result from their practice. So you want to keep that positive and reinforce that they're always doing a good job, and that they're trying to make it fun, even though it is work with the training, and blending those together. Drew actually took a 2-year break he shot for archery from age 4 to age 7. And then he took a 2-year break to age 9. And he just played video games, and he bicycled, and he was into Legos. And I completely put the archery stuff up. I didn't say a word. Of course, I'm still busy doing archery stuff. I'm coaching, and I'm training, I'm shooting, and I'm going to tournaments. But I didn't force that on him. I didn't push that on him. I didn't want to really make that an issue. I wanted him to come to the sport when he was ready. And after about 2 years, he was ready, and that's when he came up and he said, I think I want to shoot the Vegas shoot, and I want to start competing again, and I need to get back shooting. And I was like, okay, bud, then we'll do that. And so we started again. So I didn't want to turn it into any kind of forcing thing. I love it that he shoots. My wife shoots occasionally. I love it that she shoots, but again, it's not something that I force on either of them. And I think that forcing and really being disciplined on them and crushing on them kind of takes away a lot of the love of the sport that we're trying to foster. And the competing and being serious and training, it can still be fun and still have a lot of joy. You just don't want to drum that out of them. So I hope this has given you some information on kind of aging your kid as far as bare bow or Olympic recurve, on kind of when I have added things and how I did it. I'll show in the video as well, from when he's shooting, from when he goes to just the green bow with nothing, to just the wooden bow with nothing, to we add a sight first, and then I let him get used to that, and then once he's mastered that and he's asking about a short rod, then we put a little short rod on, and I let him go 6 months or so, and then we deal with that. And then from there, if they want to try a long rod, then we put the long rod on. There was a couple things. From age 4 to about age 7, he really didn't have a sight. And he didn't have a sight until he actually went and had a lesson with Coach Kim Kyung-wook, who's the Olympic gold medalist from '96. And she pulled out a shot bow that had a sight on it and started working on him with the sight. Coach Saul, 86 gold medalist, he had a lesson with her, and she was the one who moved his anchor from bare bow to under his chin. And then once we went kind of under his chin, then there was going to be a sight, and it kind of progressed into the rest of the gear. But from training, one, I didn't teach him an anchor. I wanted to make sure that his posture was good. That was the most important. Posture and alignment. I wanted him to stand up straight, and I wanted his alignment good. I didn't care where he anchored, how he anchored. I didn't care where he aimed, how he aimed. None of that. None of that was important. And that was all the way up until 2 weeks before Vegas shoot. I taught him how to anchor properly with his nose on the string. And that was when he learned to anchor, to give him that final reference point. Up until then, he was anchoring wherever he wanted to and just using the sight as a reference point. Because I wanted to make sure that form first. Form and posture and alignment. Form and posture and alignment. This is the most important. And then the arrows will group and the scores will come. And that's pretty much it. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And thanks for watching.